It's recording.
All right. I've been introduced to some new technology today, and I'm kind of excited about it. Okay, how do you want to handle, I know that the 6 primary questions got sent to you.
Yep.
So,
Do you have any to add to that, or do you want us to just kind of go through them? We leave it up to your discretion. I mean, really, we just want to meet your needs and whatever questions you do have. So I follow your lead, Tracy.
okay, so what might work would be, I've asked them if you can attend to the 6 that we sent, and after that, if questions emerge from those questions, that they could write them down, and then we'd circle back to them at the end? Or
That's fine with me.
Is that okay?
Sure. And if something's pressing, just jump in. I mean, gosh, we got plenty of time, so we should be okay.
Okay, sounds good.
Okie dokie. The timeline for implementation in the restructuring documents, basically what we're looking at, if the bylaws pass, is that beginning January 1 of 2016, so this coming January, you're looking at that at that point in time, dues become optional for participation in divisions. So at that point in time, we start really, if you will, the clock begins running, if you will, for about 18 months. And the reason for that is that our dues cycles really do fluctuate based on quarters. So for those divisions that would want to go after, for example, a geographic interest group at level 1 or 2 and do some homework, they could see how many people have optionally joined the division on an optional basis. And you got to keep in mind, from AAMFT's perspective, it takes about 3.5 notices to get people to renew their dues. So a lot of times those numbers really do fluctuate. We never really say how many members are participating in any given month because their dues are outstanding. So it starts on January 1, really the optional division dues kick in. And then basically you're looking at September 1, you're looking at members can begin to petition for the start of geographic special interest groups. So that gives basically about 9 months, 8 months, a full 8 months for divisions to take a look at their trending patterns if they want to do so. To do so anytime before then, to say, okay, we are at this point in time declaring, would probably be premature because you just don't know, and we see that all the time. You just don't know how many people are part of the association due to the fact, like I said, 3.5 times for the renewal, and then that takes time for all that to catch up. Then you're looking at that September, and then you're looking at the following May 31st, June 1, so that'd be of 2017. That's really sort of the last date for divisions to say, this is what we want to do. So that gives divisions 18 months, 17 months, I think, technically, to look at their trendings, their projections, and what it is they want to do, if they want to wait that long. Now, we have certainly had conversations with many, many divisions. Now, I wanted to say a couple, but that was back in January. We've had many divisions that basically have already started doing their business planning for a geographic interest group 1 or 2, and they want to get out of the box and do it right away and not wait. 6 of one, half dozen of another. But essentially, that would be the implementation schedule, and there's a lot more detail in your timeline guide, but those are the dates that really are there to take a peek at, because we wanted to make sure that every group that might want to create a geographic interest group has plenty of time to request from AAMFT what their trends are and what their projections are, because again, geographic interest groups don't need to be based on state lines. We have talked to a number of groups that know that on one border of the state, those people will never participate in a state geographic interest group because they go across the border for whatever it is, whether it's employment or some other things. So they wouldn't even begin to think about doing a geographic interest group based on state. They might do it by a certain county or a certain area within the state. So we can pull that data and tell the geographic interest group that is trying to form, here is what the projections are, here's what the numbers you would need to meet, and here's how many people are at least renewing in your state, looking at participating in the division itself. So it just gives you a lot of time to do some homework and to be able to take a look at numbers. If the bylaws don't pass, what's next? Well, what's next is really a regrouping. As we have looked at divisions, and again, this is part of the larger overall problem, is that our clinical fellow numbers are declining. And there is a cliff lurking out there. We just don't know where. But our clinical fellow numbers are declining, and they're declining throughout our association and in every division. And so it's rare to see a division with the numbers going up. If they do go up, it's very, very small numbers. But most of the time, it's a decline. And how divisions are making up for that, unfortunately, in the reduction of clinical fellows, which is the highest paying membership category, how they make up for the loss of revenues is raise their dues. Well, the more they raise their dues to make up for the loss of revenue, guess what? That prices us out from competing with other mental health groups because we're no longer competitive in our pricing structure. So that's not a solution that we can live with any longer. So I think, if the bylaws don't pass, we have to really regroup and say, okay, at a divisional level, are we going to be able to support and continue to survive more dues increases at the division level? I mean, we've got some divisions out there that are at the $180, $190 level to participate in the division. And at that level, I mean, you're paying basically double to belong to AAMFT. So AAMFT, the first thing we will have to do is see, do we have to put a hiatus on dues increases at the divisional level? Because we can't continue to have that go up and continue to price us out of the market when we're already priced out of the market. And it's important to think about that in terms of, when you take a look at the division dues, we're approaching the $300, and in many divisions, well over $300 to belong to AAMFT. And any increases puts us right over the top. I mean, at 201, we're competitive, but after you get above 250, we're not, and we're easily touching upon 300 plus with many divisions. So our very first step is going to have to be looking at how do we do, if you will, a price freeze, because AAMFT simply cannot compete. There's just no other way about that when you're the highest priced association to belong to, and those benefits vary based on where you live. So that would be the very first thing we would have to do if the bylaws don't pass. And then the second thing we have to start taking a peek at if the bylaws don't pass is really a two-pronged approach, is how in the world do we meet the members' needs and expectations to really have a customized member experience? How do we meet the members' needs and expectations to have specializations and hyper-specializations and credentials offered? I mean, all of that is what associations do now, and we don't have the structure or the mechanism to do that. So we would have to take a peek at how do we do that on a seriously pared down scale. I mean, when you have special interest groups that are topically related, and this isn't going to happen overnight. It's going to be a bumpy 3 years, but after the interest groups start to mature, you're looking at subspecializations can occur. You might be able to work in some credentialing, and your members' experience, knowledge, and wisdom really come to the forefront, and we're accessing members to be able to engage them and let their experience and knowledge really drive the train. Without an interest group, AAMFT is going to have to take a peek at how do we create some specializations and some credentials, and have to do that without having a structure that allows for a lot of member input and engagement. So those are the two areas that I see that AAMFT will have to take a real close look at if the bylaws don't pass, because we're priced out of the market as it is already, and we don't have any structure in place as it is to meet the members' needs and any customization. And the example I used in the town hall meetings is that, I don't quote me on the numbers, you can look it up on the website, but I think it's NESW has 30 plus interest groups, APA has about 50, ACA has 20 to 30 some interest groups, and all those interest groups develop subspecialties. They develop core content, deliver policy statements, they deliver a lot of things, briefs for the association to work on. And AAMFT, you think about that, 50, 40, 30, and AAMFT has 0. So we're just getting kicked when it comes to the marketplace and being able to have deliverables from our members who are engaged and experts in certain fields, and we can't do anything about that. And so when we have 0 and they have 20, 30, and 40, 50 groups, we have to take a look at that. So those are the two things that keep me awake at night if the bylaws don't pass, because that's going to be a head scratcher on how in the world, from a business model, we accomplish that in a manner that would meet any level of best practice standards. And that's going to take a regrouping. So pricing and the specialization and customization of benefits are two that need serious consideration, and that's where we'll have to regroup.
Can I ask a question about that, Tracy?
Statistic on the proposed changes, representative of other divisions, possibly back in January. It's important to keep in mind that was done in January, but over the past 5 months, we have had town halls, met with over 30 divisions. I would say that that data doesn't apply today at all, because there's just been such an educational bump up. People are now much more informed. Even the emails we're getting are more informed. The questions are more informed. And so I think people have understood the challenges and do see that AAMFT has to do something. We have not had one, I'm trying to just, Amanda can certainly correct me if I'm wrong, we haven't had one single division argue with the fact that we and our structure doesn't work. We have not had a single division argue that. We have had divisions argue the solution, which is the restructuring process, but we haven't had a single division not acknowledge that the structure is not working. That we haven't had that dispute at all. So everybody is now understanding much better where we are at and what the challenges are than they were in January. So I think that in January that maybe was applicable, but today the educational and the awareness level has certainly improved and increased substantially. And so now people are getting the flick, and I think that that's where we're at. And that really comes to the fact that when we did the town hall meetings with the members, there wasn't a single individual who even questioned that we have a problem staring us in the face. I think that people are a little still maybe not feeling enough of the pinch to feel that this is a problem to deal with today. And again, keep in mind, the board of directors looked at this and said, this is a 10 to 15 year plan. This isn't something that we need to have an immediate response. AAMFT is financially healthy. All of that is good. But this is about the next 10, 15, 20 years, not the next 3, 5, 10 years. So we know that there's probably a lot of divisions and a lot of people who don't see the pinch. Now, again, I alluded to it, mentioned it, we do see some divisions raising their dues because they're losing members. So there is a little bit of a pinch being felt, particularly in our smaller groups and our medium-sized groups. But the pinch hasn't really hit, and I think that that's why a lot of people are questioning whether there is a problem or what the solution is. If the bylaws are voted in, how will state advocacy and state training needs to be supported? Good question. Advocacy, the way to think about that is that on a whole, AAMFT's advocacy program, and James has joined us, he's the Director of Professional and Public Affairs, and advocacy is going to be in his bailiwick there. But advocacy as a whole for AAMFT is probably a B minus. And I say that not out of any disrespect or nefarious or negativity. It's a B minus. And the reason that I would say it's a B minus is that we have seen a lot of fragmentation. And I'll give you two different models. When AAMFT was going for licensure, we had all 50 states going for one single thing, licensure, and everybody was there. After that, we really saw a falling off at the divisional level of advocacy efforts. That doesn't mean there weren't efforts. It just became very fragmented. Some divisions and states went and did this, others went and did that. When you take that and you compare it to NASW, which is a very, very heavy top-down model. Whatever NASW says, that's what the states do. Even to NASW's, consternation, because we've wanted to partner with NASW at the state level on some things, and when the corporate office says no, even at the state level, the answer is no. That's the big downside. The big plus side is NASW can say, this is the initiative for the next 3 years, every state must do it. Well, then they put systems into place to make that happen. So we don't do that. That has been left to divisions, and we have become very fragmented. So that has hurt us, and it has helped us, but overall, it's been a weakening. So when we talk about how things will move forward, we're really going to try to have what's the family team, and I've talked a lot about the family team, and we've really put out information about it. But the best way to think about the family team is a matrix. And across the top, the columns are individuals by state, and down the side are the rows by federal and state advocacy type of issues. And where do they meet? There's your team. So in a given state, you might have 5-6 people that have identified that they want to participate, and they have 3 or 4 different interests. So now you have a pool of people. You have a team within a state that can do the grassroots work at the state, and these are people who are interested in doing advocacy. The problem we're finding, and we see a lot of, is that people are doing advocacy. We saw it for so many years at the leadership conference, is that people were coming on board and having to do advocacy and go do Hill visits, and they didn't want to do it, but it was a product of being on the board. And so we had a misfit between skill and interest and what the task was. And so we didn't even have good advocacy being done when we brought people in. We didn't have it being done at the state level because, again, the people who were interested in it weren't serving on the board or weren't on the committee. So now you have the state self-selecting its members to do the grassroots as well as help AAMFT with the federal issues. But now the real critical piece is across all the road, where now you have open space collaboration, where you have individuals in one state can talk to individuals of another state, can talk to individuals of another state about topic X. So an example I used there is a few months ago, I got a call from a division leader and said, we need language for some legislative work to be done for MFTs in the schools. Do you have it? I go, I don't have it, but I know who does. And I called up that group. They gave me the language, and I sent that on over to the other division. Well, if we would have had the family team and it would have been open space, that would have been stored in a library. That would have been a resource for everybody, and they would have been talking without having to even go through me. And they would have known way ahead of time. They could talk political strategies. They could say, don't do this, try to do that, etc. So we can really look at amping up the horsepower, if you will, because you can have that cross-state collaboration, as well as within state, you have the selection of the people who really want to do it. And finally, with the advocacy is the finances related to it. Currently, you have a situation where divisions have to save up to be able to pay for a lobbyist. And that's okay, it works. But, recently we had to help out one division, simply doesn't have enough members to support a lobbyist. They called us up and said, we've got an important bill, and it was important, it absolutely fit with the mission, and AAMFT said, okay, let's get a lobbyist on board. We interviewed, paid the money, got the individual on board, away they went, and we had success. So the finances were challenging, and with a change with the interest groups and having the family team really being the horsepower behind advocacy, we have different pockets of money we can draw upon. First off, you have the general AAMFT fund. Okay, there's always money that we should have in reserves to be able to help out. Second, if a geographic interest group is present, that geographic interest group could say one of our missions is advocacy, and they work with their members of the family team. And that geographic interest group can say we're going to earmark some money for advocacy. Fine enough. That family team, the members of that team, can also say we're going to do fundraising for advocacy. And then there's AAMFT and the Practice Protection Fund. Right now, AAMFT has well over $100,000 sitting in the Practice Protection Fund that isn't earmarked for any division. And so when a division needs help, we can help. And we can also, Amanda's group with all the marketing and stuff, we can earmark and target licensed marriage and family therapists and say to protect your license, please contribute, X amount of dollars to the fund and really earmark that for the state. So right now, divisions are relying on paying for their lobbyists through members who are members' dues, and that's part of the general fund to pay for the lobbyists. So if you don't have a lot of members or your penetration rate is really low, then what ends up happening is you don't have enough money to pay for the lobbyists over time, and a lot of the money that is being squirreled away by divisions is to pay for lobbyists, and that's a good thing. You're not hearing me complain, but as the membership numbers go down and you have to deficit spend, the lobbyists are going to be coming into question on whether we can pay for them in 10 to 15 years. So we have to have another mechanism to do that, and that's where AAMFT can go after the licensed marriage and family therapists who choose not to belong to AAMFT but still want to practice. And so that's where we can start to really do some aggressive marketing and fundraising with them and earmark it. So that's where the advocacy issues come in. Now, the same goes with, and one other thing, the economies of scale. We know right now that, for example, if you have 5 states with lobbyists, part of the contract that our states are paying for is bill tracking. And there is going to be the need for that. This is not getting rid of lobbyists, but all those lobbyists are using a piece of software that alerts them when bills come up, because it's by law you have to file and it has to enter the tracking system. Well, they come up, that same tracking program, we can have in our office, or we can hire a firm to do that and say, let's pay one bill to cover 5 states. That doesn't mean we get rid of the lobbyists. The lobbyists are still there with their ears to the ground and saying things are up, we need to alert you to this. But right now, instead of having 5 states pay 5 bills for the same service, we can pay it once and cover, those 5 states. You have the economies of scale that can kick in there. The training, when we talk about training needs, AAMFT is authorized for all the major groups to offer CEUs. All we have to do is touch the application, basically. And there's got to be some of our involvement. So what ends up happening there is with a topical interest group or a geographical interest group, and they're having CEUs events. Those would all run through AAMFT, and we're already approved providers, the CEUs. So again, that won't adversely impact getting the CEUs because it's going to be part of the interest groups that will be housed under AAMFT. And as long as AAMFT is participating and has a touch on it, we're good. So both of those issues, AAMFT will be actively participating in and have our processes down. Preclinical fellows, CEUs, and preclinical fellows drop their membership upon graduation. One of the things that we are going to be doing, regardless of the bylaw passage, if it passes, is developing an emerging leaders track and program. Now, with bylaws, it can be more robust than it can be now, but we are definitely going that route. And we saw a great example of that was at the Leadership Symposium this year, which was really for those emerging leaders, preclinical fellows and clinical fellows of less than 5 years. The excitement was unbelievable, and we clearly hit a nerve where their needs were being met. And so what we will be doing is investing into the emerging leaders at one level or another. And it's a heavy investment on our part. I would like to have it be where you have an emerging leaders interest group where you could actually have mentors tied to the emerging leaders, and you can have actual topical interest groups within the larger group. So we will be, one way or another, putting together the programming for that. Now, under the interest group bylaws that they pass and doing that, now you can have where, let's just say, for example, you have a topical interest group, specialty things such as treating military personnel and their families. Let's just say that's a topical interest group. Keep in mind, topical interest groups don't have homes. They're going to be global, and they need to have a home where they want to have a networking event. And they might say, well, we've got a whole bunch of folks in our topical interest group who reside in this geographic area, which may have a geographic interest group. Well, now the two interest groups can get together, put on a conference, etc. While they're putting on that conference, that's where we would be encouraging them to have the ability to support the preclinical fellows, the emerging leaders of tomorrow, so that they can then have some benefit to both, whether they're a member or not. Because again, keep in mind, we're going to have this emerging leader, and if the bylaws pass, there will be an emerging leader special interest group. And so we will be working very hard to make sure that they have always access to all these other groups at either a discounted rate or at a free rate, depending upon what it is, so that they are not penalized, because we know we can't lose them and we need to keep them in the pipeline. And that is something that we're very invested in. We're happy that our efforts in the last couple of years have started to pay off, because we've seen to the clinical fellow, we were down at about, a few years ago, we were at about, man, correct me here, but I think it was like 30% of our preclinical fellows ended up being clinical fellows, and now we've actually seen the lines cross right at 50%. So we've done a good job, but we can do better, and that's how we would be able to do that. I think I got through all your questions.
Can you hear me?
Question 3, Trish, about the message.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm just curious. One question that came up would be, if the bylaw changes pass, how quickly does AAMFT feel that they could flex if they see that their implementation is not producing the results that they believe it might?
Well, we're looking at a 3 to 5 year window before we would see the results that we are anticipating, okay? Because it's going to take at least 3 years to transition all of the divisions and to create what would be considered mature interest groups. So then after 3 years, that's when you're going to start seeing, if you will, hopefully the payoff. I'm looking at probably 5 years where you have enough maturation to be able to say, now, are we attractive to the other groups? So when you ask about the flex, looking at this over time, there will be a lot more adaptability that AAMFT can make if we are not tied to a mandatory 2-tier system. So right now, our structure is probably the hardest structure to have any flexibility or adaptation. When we decouple, and AAMFT is with special interest groups, we've done the research on what is, best practice, and those organizations that have absolutely flourishing interest groups and vibrant. And so we know that we're going to have to make a lot of adaptations after probably the 3rd year. We're going to make a lot of adaptations during the first 3 years, but we know that we're going to have to do that. And once we're able to not worry with the mandatory due structure, then we can do a lot of different things, because we are keeping ourselves stable and price competitive with the other associations. And that's where our flexibility needs to be. So I look at us as that even if the payoff isn't there in 3 to 5 years, the new structure gives us the flexibility to do what we need to do, where our current structure, as we are seeing right now by having these conversations, simply doesn't allow or provide that flexibility whatsoever.
Okay, one more thing, and I hope I can articulate it in a way that makes sense. How do you see our uniqueness in the marketplace with regards to our brand of being systemic marriage and family therapists as AAMFT looks at special interest groups, attracting other professions to want to play in our special interest group versus, say, for instance, if I'm in the emotionally focused couples therapy interest group that I'm presently part of, what would make me say, hey, I want to be with AAMFT because really they're the systemic, more family therapy, more, that I don't know if I'm articulating that well, but what would draw me to AAMFT versus APA or NASW for that need to be met?
Okay, good question. I think that there's a couple of variables that are in there. I think the first variable to think about is that AAMFT is going to do it systemically. And I think that that's where the attraction is to make sure that we are being very relational and very systemic versus what other groups are not so much. I don't want to say they're not doing it, but I want to just say that they're not going to probably be as pure or as driven to be systemic as we are. So what the attraction would be is if those folks are systemic, then they're going to see AAMFT as setting the standard for the systemic delivery of that interest group, whatever it might be. The second thing that draws folks from there is we've got to think about our penetration rates. And our penetration rates are about in the 52 to 55% right there as a whole. Some states are higher, 60, 67%. Some states are down in the low 30s, high 20s. So when we take a look at our penetration rate of clinical fellows into the licensed marriage and family therapists, we got to basically just think of it, half of them are not part of AAMFT. And if AAMFT is able to offer interest groups that are not only systemic, but also have a few of those interest groups really focusing in on the topical areas that the clinical issues are developing subspecializations, and maybe even then a portion of those have a credential associated with them, that's what's going to draw the folks to us, because we would then become the systemic experts that have the credential. I mean, this is like going back, it's back to the future type of stuff. That's when we were clinical members. There's those of us who were that way back in the day, where when you were a clinical member, you were recognized as a TRICARE provider. That credential got you reimbursement for services. Well, it's always going to be based on licensure and going forward. But to have that credential that makes you slightly better than the rest as recognized is very important. And so it's, for us, I think the attraction is that we would do systemic better. We would be doing the element that people were trained in or they find attractive, where the other groups are simply doing it based on the content of the topic.
Okay. Any other questions?
I had a question.
Can you hear her?
Well, I'll tell you and you can tell him. If the money
Yes, I
from
can hear.
Okay.
the divisions is going back to the AAMFT, is AAMFT going to fund some of these special interest groups?
Well, the money that currently is with a division stays with the geographic area. So if a division were to become a geographic level 1 or 2, that money stays at the geographic level 1 or 2. If the division dissolves, that money is going to, it'll have to come to AAMFT because we've got to protect the money, but it will be only for state advocacy purposes. So the money that divisions have currently stay with state. So AAMFT, it's not going to go back into a general fund or anything like that. It will be earmarked for either advocacy issues of the state if it dissolves, or it goes right back to geographic interest groups and for the development of that interest group.
Any other questions?
I had another money question.
Okay.
Are the national dues slated to remain at $201, or are you looking at reducing it to making it even more attractive and competitive?
We won't be reducing it. AAMFT's national dues, they go up whatever the nominal thing is on a schedule every 3 to 4 years, something like that. And the 201 is competitive. We're in the ballpark. We can't reduce it due to the fact that we're going to have to continue to support during the 3 to 5 years 2 programs. If the bylaws pass, we're going to be supporting divisions and interest groups until this is all transitioned out. Then we're going to be back to the interest groups, and hopefully at that point in time, the interest groups will be self-sustaining and self-supporting, and they will go on their way. And AAMFT's dues increases will be just in line with whatever the other associations are. But we can't really reduce them because of the fact that we're going to be running 2 programs simultaneously.
I don't know if this question has been answered, but what are some of the special interest groups that are already sort of in the works?
Well, we don't have any in the works. There's basically 2 groups that we know we have to get up and running. The first one is the family team, and that's the advocacy both at the state and at the federal level. And that's a group we are investing in heavily because we know we have to. And we have seen states, can't talk right now, sorry, states literally collapse in the last, 6 months. We've had states collapse. And so, and have told us that either they're dissolving or going away. So we know we have got a problem, and we have to beef that up ASAP. So we will be working on the family team, and that, like I said, is under James, and he's going to be working on getting that really amped over the next 18 months, and to make sure that's beefed up. And then the second group is going to be the emerging professionals group. And so that will be the one that we will be offering the emerging professionals. And right now we're looking at, this is tentative, please don't quote me on it, but it will include students and preclinical fellows and then clinical fellows up to 3 or 5 years into their membership as emerging professionals. And that's going to be a free interest group. So both of those are going to be free. That AAMFT will be funding the entire programming for them because we recognize how important they are for this association and the profession. And then after that, we don't have any on the books.
Wow.
Okay. Anything else?
Can I have one more? Are there any regional or division? Are there any regions or divisions that have come together and sort of stepped forward and said, if this passes, then this is what we want?
We've had questions about regionalization and how we have answered that question. So I know that that's a conversation. As a matter of fact, we know of one group yesterday, we talked to them and they were talking about that. The regionalization is, there's a couple of things that we have told folks is, number one, what do you offer the group? And 2, what does the group offer you? So in a division or an area that is reasonably strong, the question of regionalization, if I was the business owner, okay, if I'm the business owner, I would probably be saying, I don't know if I want to regionalize because the other groups may need me more than I need them. And if I've got to hit 30 or 70% catchment area, I'm probably going to stack the odds in my favor. And so if a weaker division is coming to me and saying, I want to regionalize with you, I got to know that there's certain element of something to offer. I mean, so we've said to groups, be careful about regionalization if you're the strong entity. And then we've said to those that are maybe not the strong division, if you're going to regionalize, you need to be careful that you don't lose your area of the world. And what I mean by that is that the reason associations, including AAMFT, I mean, way back in the day, I was the Region 6, I think, representative, student representative to AAMFT. The reason associations did away with regionalization is really code for a city. So you have a region that is this big, whatever that is, and it has 2 urban areas that can support networking events or conferences, that's where they're going to be held. So the only members of that region that certainly get the benefit are those that live close to those urban areas. And that is how regionalization will eventually unfold. And that's how it's unfolded. And that's why associations all over have done away with regionalization, because they know that they can't meet that member need, because it'll eventually gravitate to those specific urban areas. Now, that being said, regionalization, on the other hand, where we had a conversation with one group, they talked about a corridor, and they called it the Economic Strength Corridor. And it crossed over 3 different states. And so what they were thinking about doing was creating a regional catchment area that basically included specific counties within 3 different states. And that was going to be their region. Now, I thought that was a brilliant idea, because it was a corridor of a concentration of folks that they don't need to worry about it's going to favor an urban area. All of that corridor, as they put it, was at 90 miles. I think all of it was in 90 miles. Well, they were thinking about making that a region. And if they made that a region, wow, that would be a potent catchment area. And those members would get a lot of service. I'm absolutely confident of it. We've talked to other groups that have said, hey, listen, our state border, we know, doesn't participate in our state. They participate across the border. So we're thinking about making a region of these counties within our state. Now, those kind of regional models absolutely, I think, have a lot of potential, because of the fact that they're not spread over hundreds and hundreds of miles, maybe even 1,000 miles. They're spread over a very concentrated area, and they're saying we are going to serve this geographic catchment area. So we've had conversations on both sides. Big regions, and then I always say, are you going to lose yourself because it's going to go to the urban areas within a few years? And if you're one of the strong ones, how much are you going to be weakened by the lesser ones? And then we've had the regionalizations talking about even down to the county. So that's where the conversations have been on both ends of that continuum.
And then we've also talked to divisions that as they do their business planning for moving forward, they have a goal of being a level 2 group, and they are making a plan with their board and looking at their finances and talking about what they would want to accomplish under that, or what a level 1 would look like. So there's lots of business planning and conversations going on.
Hi, so I actually have almost a 2-part question, possibly. So as we're talking about deciding about the geographic, specific, specialty type of groups, is there any sort of set proposal for how AAMFT will decide which of those groups they're going to choose to support? And if so, once they are supported, how are we going to measure if they're actually doing what we think they should be doing? So are there any specific mandates for what those specific groups should be doing as far as serving the membership, or how are we going to manage that?
Okay, good question. The first thing is that during the first 3 years, we know that AAMFT is going to have to support at some level, because these are getting launched, and we're going to have to support, whether it's through finances, whether it's through staff. I mean, we've already, like Amanda said, had folks saying, can we call you up and talk about a business plan with you, those kind of things. So AAMFT will be a strong supporter of the interest groups, whether it's geographic or topical, is irrelevant. We're going to support them, because it's not in our interest to have them fail. We have to have them succeed. So we will be supporting. Now, the critical piece over that is the transition of 3 years, because one of the critical components is that there must be a balanced budget. So AAMFT will work with that geographic interest group and say, how are you going to balance your budget based on the numbers that you're hitting? And if you don't hit the numbers, what do we need to do? Do we have to do more marketing? Do we have to do something to help? What is it that we have to do? Because if a group hits 70%, a couple of years later it's down to 30%, a couple of years later it's down to 12%, well, that group doesn't need to exist anymore. It needs to be sunsetted. So what we know is AAMFT will help support at a number of different levels the geographical and the topical interest groups. Part of that support and part of the relationship of that is to also buffer against bad interest groups that you pay dues and get nothing from them. is that in that annual balancing of the budget, there needs to be deliverables negotiated. And so if it's a topical interest group, for example, AAMFT might say that on that topic, we really need a policy brief. Or on that topic, we need some research done that gives us some basic elements of core competencies. Or on that topic, here is what's missing because it's not being done systemically. You know, an example of that would be I got asked by the American Psychiatric Association to review a high-risk assessment tool that they had. And they sent it to me, and it was, 12 pages. And in that 12 pages, there wasn't one question about systems, not one. Okay? And it was like, I wrote back, I wrote like 4 questions, and I said, ditto, ditto, ditto in every section. So we might say that that's a deliverable. So who knows what it could be based on the topic, as well as the geography. The geography might be, in your geographic area, can you please tell us, who are your 5 major employers? I mean, I would love to have that in the database. Do they hire MFTs? Tell us that. So what are the deliverables? And if you've identified those 5, maybe AAMFT can come up with some supporting documents, help out the geographic interest group, etc., and then be able to say, next year, can you get these in the hands of those employers and do that? So the whole idea is to really work together. We will support, and then if deliverables aren't being met, that's going to be a serious conversation on the existence of that interest group, because we know that for the members to join that interest group, they have been sold on the idea that that interest group is going to do the following. And if that interest group is not doing the following, I have to worry about our members who paid for something and they didn't get it. And that will be a very different conversation. Hopefully we don't have to have too many of those, but we would have to have them if the deliverables that we negotiated don't get delivered as promised.
He answered it.
I just have one question. I have one question for the different regional groups. Let's say Kentucky, for example, and we go along with all of this in the 3 to 5 years. Will there be specific guidelines or criteria that you will give us so that we can be comparing how we're doing and looking at how we're doing with advocacy, with emerging leaders? Do we have something that we can go by so that we can tell how we're doing?
Absolutely.
Based on your
thank
research?
You so much. Absolutely. Thank you for that question. Because one of the things is we, AAMFT, as you probably noticed, we are benchmarking everything. Twice a year you get a scorecard in the e-news and in the mail, and we hand it out to business meeting that benchmarks AAMFT against other associations on critical variables. And that's a great question, because we need to make sure that we are performing and that we're having the tools delivered to the interest groups so that they can perform. I mean, there's no reason to set this up and then not give the tools. So it'll be one of those things as we negotiate, if you will, and talk about the balanced budget, the deliverables, etc. What are the benchmarks that interest group, whether topical or geographic, what are the benchmarks of performance, and what is necessary for AAMFT to be able to deliver? And James and I were in a meeting yesterday, and we were talking about the databasing behind advocacy and how many different data points we would have to collect and be able to drill down so that we could help any catchment area. And so we were already talking about that for the family team. So the question is spot on. The short answer is yes. I know I gave a long-winded answer, but a perfect question. The answer is yes.
Thank you.
How's it going to pay for itself? Are they charging dues by region, or is AAMFT sponsoring this, or what?
But the geographic interest groups, that's where the balanced budget comes in. So if your geographic interest group says we're going to have 30% catchment and we want to be a level 1, then the leadership of that geographic interest group is going to have to figure out how much they're charging to belong to that interest group. If it's a level 2 interest group, the leadership of the interest group determines how much it's going to be charging. And this goes back to the value-based, because as these are all starting up, they'll all sound really good, but in 5 years, it now becomes, it's a free marketplace. So if I'm a member and I'm wherever my feet are, wherever my residence is, I might say, you know what, I really like what this geographic interest group is doing. I'm going to pay my dues to that geographic interest group, and that's all. But I also could be someone who says, I don't like what my geographic interest group is doing, but I really like what that topical interest group is doing, and I want to join the topical interest group. Then there are others who will join 2 or 3. When we had a meeting one time, there was a gentleman who said, you know what, I can see myself, it's going to be like grocery shopping. I'm going to join 5 of them at a time. It was so funny to listen to how people talk about them. But it's basically knowing that every interest group is going to be competing with other interest groups. And that's what makes the value valuable to the members and customizes that member experience.
Okay, thank you for your time, Tracy. And
Oh, you're very
Amanda,
welcome.
and I didn't catch the gentleman's name at the bottom.
James Morris?
James, thank you
He's our
for
new director.
carving your time out and meeting with us.
You're very
Thank
welcome.
you. Have a great weekend.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.